Welcome, sports fans, to the Week 15 Steel Scorpion Sports Podcast. Live from San Diego, I'm Jeff Miller.
Live from San Jose, I'm Mark Huffman.
Mark, it's great to hear your voice on a games. So obviously, we don't know the outcome of New Orleans and Chicago yet. I'll go out on a limb and say Jay Cutler will have some turnovers, Drew Brees will look less than spectacular, and someone will win the game. Fair enough?
Yeah, I think that's probably a pretty good prediction.
All right. So with that in mind, why don't you give us the Vegas results up to now through Week 15?
All right, so 15 through the Sunday night game, favorites were 7-1. In related news, the underdogs were 7-1. So they're even split there. And then for the season, we're almost dead even as well. So for the season, favorites are 107, 109, and 5. The overs had a very, very bad week if you look at the overs this week. There were 3 overs that hit and 12 unders that hit. And even a couple of the unders were not even, they just kind of snuck over. So the Raiders and Chiefs scored 44 points against an over 41.5 when the Raiders got a late touchdown. And then the other over was Patriots-Dolphins, scored 54 against an over 49, but there were late scoring there as well. So we almost had a week of one over. And then the other one that went over fairly easy was the Sunday night game, but then again, the prime times seemed to go over quite a lot. But so a very, very bad week for the overs, and now the unders are ahead on the season. So the over...
The underdog, that has come to fruition, I see, with that full 2-game lead on the favorites.
Sure, yes. If you would, I guess technically the underdogs are winning, but let's just basically call it 50-50.
So truly, I guess what we should have called this, it's not the year of the underdog, it's the year of the primetime over.
Yes, that's probably the most prevalent term this year.
Crazy to think that we all went into this thinking there'd be some sort of seismic shift and underdogs would make out much better than they have. But Vegas seems to know what they're doing.
They do. Those casinos don't get built for nothing. So.
All right, well, next time I'm there, I'll ask for our money back. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, try that.
Okay, I'll call you from jail. But enough on Vegas. As I said, we don't have the results from Chicago and New Orleans yet, but mark an even week from the underdogs versus the favorites. But speaking of those underdogs and favorites, there were some great outcomes from Week 15 that really helped shape the playoff races, especially in the AFC where 3 divisions were locked up. And in the NFC, it really brought some things into clarity, eliminating a few more teams, but also threw some wrenches into what we may have assumed were going to be some of the seeding. So why don't you lead us into our Week 15 discussion?
Yeah, Week 15, well, one of the things I want to discuss is the parity. Usually you see a lot of turnover from year to year. I think there was a while there for a good stretch of 8 years in a row or something like that, where basically half the playoff field would turn over from one year to the next. And to pull up last year's standings just to refresh my memory on the playoff team. So last year, the Patriots won the division. Check, they've won again. The Colts won the division. Check, they've won it again with 2 weeks left. The Broncos won the division. Check, they won it today with 2 weeks left. The Bengals also won the division, and with 2 weeks left, they are leading their division, so we could see a repeat of all 4 division winners in the AFC. The other 2 playoff teams last year were the Chiefs and the Chargers, both of whom are still alive at 8-6, but trailing the 9-5 Steelers and the 9-5 Ravens. So we could, at the very least, we're going to see 4 of the 6 playoff teams repeat in the AFC, and potentially 5 of 6, and technically we're still alive to see 6 of 6 teams repeat, which would be very, very rare.
Yeah, that's pretty ridiculous to think that all the teams could repeat. I will say I don't think both San Diego and Kansas City will make it, if either. So I think we will see some turnover. But when you think of that, you mentioned last year it was the division winners, as always, and the 2 wild cards both came out of the AFC West. Well, right now, as you said, the 2 wild cards would be coming out of the AFC North, so it's very similar to last year. And You get the same division winners, theoretically, if Cincy holds on, and then the 2 wild cards come out of one division. That's very possible, with Pittsburgh and Baltimore sitting in the position right now that would give them the wild cards. And I think if that comes to fruition, the AFC North should send lots of thank you cards, maybe a few late Christmas gifts to the NFC South.
Well, the NFC South and the AFC South, because they got to play against that division, and so you have 2 really, really pathetic teams in the 2-12 Titans and the 2-12 Jaguars. So they picked up some easy wins there as well. So when you play the South of the South this year, that's kind of why we're seeing this. You know, some people are just saying, "Oh my God, the AFC North is so good. All the teams are 500 better." Yes, that's true. That's a fact. But when you look at the teams who are getting to play, the NFC South, where every team sucks, and the AFC South, where half the teams are beyond horrible, that certainly leads to what we're seeing in the AFC North this year.
True. I shouldn't have mocked just the NFC South. I should have thrown in the AFC South for good measure. So I apologize to the AFC North. You should be buying extra gifts because you owe Jacksonville and Tennessee some late Christmas gifts as well.
And it'll be interesting. I don't look to see which divisions they'll match up with next year for the 2015 schedule, but clearly it will not be the AFC South or the NFC South, but the 2 different divisions. So expect to see quite a lot of regression of those records for the AFC North next year.
That could have been to a under win total bet there, Mark. Is that what I heard?
Well, maybe. I'm not even looking that far ahead yet. We have to wait and see what happens in free agency and the draft, and see what the schedule looks like. Because
fair enough.
We'll know the actual opponents at the end of the season, but you also have to look at the flow of the schedule. Like, that's part of the reason that we like the Panthers under this year, because they had that stretch where they faced 4 or 5. They faced the Saints, the Eagles, the Packers, the Bears, all those teams in a row. We foresaw a losing streak that happened. But yes, we will get to that down the road.
Fair enough. I jumped the gun on that, so we'll hold off and under bets until the underlines for wins are actually announced sometime in the summer. Probably best to wait.
Yes.
But beyond the, as you mentioned, the AFC, the excitement of the 3 divisions being clinched, the potential for all the playoff teams to make the playoffs, or again to have 2 wild cards out of the same division. Any other games that caught your interest this week? Because I know on the NFC side there were a few interesting ones that I wanted to touch on, namely the big Sunday night win by Dallas and Green Bay letting the number 1 seed potentially slip through their icy fingers.
Yeah, we'll get to games in a second. Following up on the same thing as far as playoff teams repeating, from last year you had division winners, the Eagles, Packers, Panthers, and Seahawks. Now, potentially they could all repeat. Philadelphia is now a game down, but they still have a chance. Green Bay is now tied with Lions, but they can still win that division. Carolina, wow, that's 12-4 last year, and they're 5-8-1 now, but can still win that division with their win today. And then Seattle, they have a huge game coming up. We'll get to later, but they could potentially win that division. And the 2 walk-ons last year were the Saints and the Niners. Now we know the Niners are done. I think they're probably mathematically eliminated now as well. And then, so I think we're going to see a lot of the same teams in the AFC as well, probably at least 4 out of 6. So quite a lot of, sameness from one year to the next, whereas we usually see a little bit more turnover than that. But the game you mentioned with Green Bay actually losing in Buffalo, they had a chance to get the 1 seed, and now there's going to be quite a scramble. We have 4 teams at 10-4. You've got the Cowboys, Lions, Packers, and Seahawks all sitting at 10-4. Arizona 1 game ahead of them all, 11-3. And Arizona has a really tough game this week, hosting Seattle. Seattle's defense is certainly playing top-notch these days, and I'm not sure, but I think, did Arizona contact you to see if maybe you wanted to start a QB for them this week?
Well, no, they already have a quarterback that was in San Diego, Ryan Lindley, so they've covered that quotient, so they didn't need me. I was wondering if they were actually going to contact you, because I know you swam and ran some, so that seems very apropos to their offense of throwing the deep ball.
I'm a little behind on my emails. Yeah, to be honest, I gotta go to my inbox. There's a chance I have an email from them in there because they are struggling. Stanton is out. We already know that Palmer's out. They're down to Lindley and Logan Thomas, who did not even look good when he played for Virginia Tech and had 3 turnovers a game. So I don't know who their emergency quarterback is. You know, we had some situations today where teams were trying to figure out who the emergency quarterback is because Fitzpatrick was injured and then Savage was in there. And for a while, it looked like Savage might have injured his knee. And they were talking about Shane Weckler used to play quarterback in high school. We had a similar situation in Tennessee today where Walker got injured and then Berger was in there. And they were talking about that Nate Washington, I think they said, might have to come in and play QB. So some weird QB situations going around in the NFL as we head into Week 16.
Yeah, so I've got 2 words for you if I'm Arizona. Kurt Warner. I mean, sure, he hasn't played in, 3 years, but I have to believe he could come in there and be just as effective, if not more so, than Ryan Lindley and Logan Thomas.
He probably could be, and, speaking of that, there was, some Twitter mentions or something of, Brett Favre. Would they be interested in bringing him in? You have to figure, same thing. He hasn't played in 4 or 5 years, but he's got to be better than Logan Thomas and Ryan Lindley, right?
Yeah, I think the only thing that keeps you, if you're a Brett Favre supporter or a consultant for him, in recommending that, is it would reset your Hall of Fame clock, right? So you don't really.
Yeah, I think he's going to be up for it next year. I believe he's 1 year away from the vote. And yes, if he came back and played even 1 game, then he'd have to wait another 5 years. So that's kind of what.
Yeah, at this point, I think he just waits. But it's good that his name still makes the rounds whenever a quarterback opening seems to be out there that a veteran could fill in for. So good to hear. Yeah, that'll be interesting next week. But before we get to next week, let's finish up with Week 15. And yes, Ryan Lindley did come through on Thursday night. I was very proud of the San Diego State former QB going through the motions of whatever that is that they were calling offense in that game. I believe you and I combined for as many touchdowns as those teams.
Yeah, that was just, that Thursday night games, there tend to be some clunkers. There's been some really bad Thursday night games over the last couple of years, and that was just a prime example of just not great football to watch.
Which is interesting, though, because you mentioned that did get the Cardinals the 11-win plateau. Then you have those 4 teams with the 10 wins, and then you have Philadelphia sitting at 9 wins, which means as of today, Philly's out of the playoffs. And they're a good team. I think we talked about this last week on the podcast, but the NFC, the unfortunate thing for one of these teams is that you're going to likely have a 10 or 11-win team that gets left out of the playoffs because you also mentioned Carolina could very well win that division, or New Orleans. Potentially Atlanta, I think, is still alive. Unfortunately, that any of those teams would probably at best have 7 wins.
Yeah, and it's really unfortunate. One of those crappy teams is going to keep a really good team out. I saw it last year. Arizona was 10-6 and missed the playoffs, and now, actually at 11-3, they're the one NFC team that has actually wrapped up the playoff spot. Though they have not wrapped up the division. So Seattle, who's already beaten Arizona once, plays at Arizona in Week 16. It's the primetime game. If Seattle were to win that, then they would both be 11-4, and Seattle obviously would have the head-to-head tiebreaker, having beaten them twice. So Seattle, after kind of a slow start this season, in fact, they were 6-4 at one point. At this point now, they still potentially could get the number 1 seed now. There's actually a fair number of teams that could still get the number 1 seed. The Cowboys, actually, that still have the number 1 seed. As does Arizona, as does Seattle, as does Green Bay, and as does, I'm assuming Detroit could pull it out as well. So NFC playoff picture is still quite a bit up in the air.
Yes, should be an interesting last 2 weeks for the NFC. A little less so on the AFC side unless you're a fan of the wild card teams or the AFC North. But could be some interest in that playoff picture coming into clarity over the next few weeks. But another thing, Mark, that came into clarity this week is how I love the hype machine in Bristol, Connecticut that did roll us right down the path of Johnny Foosball, because that Bengals Browns game was amazing. If you saw any of it,
I did watch some of it. I was concentrating mostly on the Colts Texans game in the morning window of games, but out of curiosity, of course, I did flip over a few times to see how Johnny Nightclub was performing, and it was pretty atrocious. He just did not look good up there. He threw 3 interceptions, one of which got overturned via penalty, but so he had 2 official interceptions and threw for less than 100 yards, ran for a whopping 13 yards, and put a very impressive 0 points on the scoreboard.
Yeah, and I really wanted to bring that up because I know there's some people out there that were faced with QB dilemmas as they went into the fantasy playoffs. And if you're in a deeper league and many of the QBs were already taken, and perhaps you had Cam Newton and he gets in a car accident this week, and Cam Newton's going to miss your playoff game now. Now maybe you could pick up Derek Anderson, who really should be the Panthers MVP. He's 2-0 as a starter for the Panthers. That's almost as many wins as Cam Newton has in many less games for Derek Anderson, so good for him. But if you didn't pick up Derek Anderson, you could pick up Johnny Manziel. Those were about the only pickups you could probably have made. And if you didn't have a decent backup on your bench, you probably went with the glitz and glamour of Johnny Manziel, and you got burned. So I feel for those people that in the fantasy playoffs came to the conclusion that they were going to start Johnny Foosball, Johnny Nightclub, and, you know, I think they hit their 2-drink minimum pretty early there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could see if someone was in a kind of a weird QB situation with a starter, or like you said, if their starter got injured. I mean, you could kind of potentially see where someone might try it, just, you know, based on rushing stats alone. You kind of figure, based on his college days and based on what you saw last week for his 180-yard drive, you kind of figured Manziel would probably give you, 40 to 50 rushing yards, if not more, and then maybe a rushing touchdown. And obviously, you had to figure he was going to throw for more than 100 yards. Jeez. To only throw for 80 was pretty ridiculous. You got to figure, even on a bad day, a QB's not throw for 150 yards in today's NFL. So, yeah, if anyone tried that, it definitely did not work out. But on the flip side of that, I wanted to ask you this. I was going to save this for on the spot, but we'll do it here now, because I'm pretty sure you were in a league where you had Aaron Rodgers, and do you think anyone had the balls to bench Aaron Rodgers in the fantasy playoffs? I know he was the NFC, or he was the leading MVP candidate coming into this year, but they were playing at Buffalo, the number 2 ranked pass defense in the NFL, and we had the ability to see just a week prior what they did to Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning threw for 200 yards or less, I think like 180, and no touchdowns with 2 interceptions. So, I don't think you did mention, but do you think there could have been a justification to potentially do so?
I'll be honest, I did look at that because I saw he was playing the Bills matchup. It didn't look good. I didn't have an option of benching him without making a move, because you would assume I had a backup quarterback, which I don't anymore. Because when you have Aaron Rodgers, once you get through the bye weeks, and especially you get later on in the season, you need to make a couple moves. Maybe you have some running back or wide receiver injuries you're trying to cover for, as I have. I got rid of my backup quarterback 2 weeks ago. So I did worry about the matchup, but I had no option of benching him, and there was no one out there to pick up to do that. And no, even if there were a viable play, you wouldn't bench him. What you would talk yourself into, as I did, was Peyton Manning has been surviving the last couple weeks with the running game. Denver was trying to prove to everybody that they could be a rushing team, and they want to keep Manning, who's 38 years old, from having to throw 600 times. Keep his arm a little fresher so that when you get to the playoffs, maybe he's a little stronger than he is, typically. Okay, that makes sense. The Packers, Rodgers is younger, and their running game hasn't been great. And against Buffalo, you didn't figure they'd be able to run the ball, so you figured they'd be able to pass. They passed on New England. They've passed on everybody. So, no, you would have started him anyway, as I did, and suffered through that horrid performance. So just like other people suffered through Manning's performance last week and cost them a game in the playoffs likely, the Rodgers game is likely going to cost me a game in the playoffs. Boo.
Yeah, I figured most teams that had him probably did start him this week, and probably, if not 100%, at least 99%. But, and of course, hindsight is 2020 now that we, saw the result. But as I was looking at that, the tough matchup and what happened, I just wondered if anyone actually had the guts. And I guess it would depend on your bench. If you had Rodgers and you had maybe, someone like a Roethlisberger or a Phillip Rivers, maybe you would consider it, maybe. But then again, Rodgers had such an amazing season so far. Obviously, if you had someone lesser than that, if you had someone like Eli Manning or Mark Sanchez, you would just roll the dice with Rodgers. But yeah, he definitely cost some people their playoffs this week.
And in the process, may have cost Green Bay that has to go to Seattle. We've seen that game. As I recall from the first game of the season, it doesn't end well for Green Bay. They had the chance to bring Seattle to them, and by losing to Buffalo, they've now perhaps given that away, assuming Seattle wins out. Green Bay can't pass them. So, damaging loss for Green Bay and Buffalo. Huge win for Dallas at Philly, because Dallas could have nearly been eliminated from the playoffs. Still a chance they don't make it, but now there's also a chance, as you said, their dream scenario is they win out. Green Bay and Detroit do not, and Seattle wins out, and then Dallas actually has the tiebreaker on Seattle. I mean, all these scenarios are crazy.
And they actually won at Seattle, which is crazy. Which is going to get me into what I was going to say. As far as teams that want home field advantage for the playoffs, obviously Seattle is tough to beat at home. But they did lose that crazy game early in the season to Dallas. But Seattle is 6-1 at home. Arizona is 7-0 at home. Detroit is 7-1 at home. Green Bay 7-0 at home. And Philly finished 6-2 at home. Dallas, however, the Cowboys should maybe want to, and they can't. I don't think they can pull this off. They pretty much need to win the division based on the strength of the NFC. But they kind of need to beat the 6th seed, because they're 3-4 at home, but 7-0 on the road. They're one of the road games this week 17. They play at Washington. Let's face it, they probably win that game. They finish 8-0 on the road. Do they want to beat the number 1 seed?
No, they want to be on the road. And I did see that stat tonight watching the game, that when they went up a couple scores late in the game, that they were now moving to 7-0 on the road. And I thought the same thing. I thought, wow, there's no conceivable way they can actually lose their way into the 6th seed, is there? And I don't know that there is, because, as you said, obviously there probably is, but there are a lot of things that have to happen, probably starting with Arizona beating Seattle this week would really help Dallas, because then if they drop a game, let Philly catch them, Philly wins the division, they move back to a wild card spot, but they have the tiebreaker on Seattle, so they're guaranteed a playoff spot, then maybe they can make it work. But you're right, I think they're the one team that home field advantage doesn't seem to mean much. Now maybe in the playoff game it would, because you've heard the rumors and seen those videos where the Dallas stadium is overrun with fans from the other teams, because they make it a destination game. I'm going to go see the Cowboys, and people are selling them tickets. But a playoff game, maybe you wouldn't sell the tickets. You'd want to go to the playoff game. It would be an event for the Dallas.
Mathematically possible for them to somehow slide at number 6 seed, but it would probably be a combination of A, B, C, D, E, F, and G would all have to happen, and I'm guessing Cowboy fans do not want to risk that. But yeah, it's crazy, because every single other NFC team has at least 3 road losses, and then you have the Cowboys, who will probably finish 8-0.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I'm glad you pointed out, though, that Arizona has not lost at home. They have one home game left, and it's huge with Seattle, so that'll go a long way towards determining if Seattle's going to have a shot at home field and maybe repeating, going to the Super Bowl, or whether Arizona is going to lock up that number 1 seed with a week to go in the NFC season and, man, put Seattle into dire straits of making the playoffs.
Yeah, this should be an interesting game. As far as, maybe a little betting preview, I would think that I haven't even seen the over-under for that game yet. You kind of think it's going to have to be, I would bet the under. Seattle's offense is not great. It's okay. And then Arizona has a great defense. Obviously, we talked about a QB situation. They're not going to put a lot of points on the board. They're going to be trying to play a ball control game. They're going to try to run the clock. clock. Sadly for them, their running back situation is not the greatest right now either. They already had to put Andre Ellington on IR, so they are using, I think, Kerwin Williams is their main running back right now, someone that the Colts could certainly use, considering that they, once upon a time, drafted him in the 7th round, I believe. But you'd have to think that game's going to go under because, just from all those factors I said.
Well, I disagree with one factor. I don't think Arizona will try a ball control offense. This is Bruce Arians. Bruce Arians believes that Drew Stanton can lead him to the Super Bowl. He's going to believe Ryan Lindley can lead him to the Super Bowl. And he's going to take his shots down the field because Bruce Arians knows no other way to call offense.
Wow, that's going to be pretty risky if you have Ryan Lindley throwing bombs against the Seattle defense, and maybe that would work against a large portion of defenses in the NFL. I think the Seattle defense is one that he's going to get burned if he's trying to do something like that.
Well, it didn't work against St. Louis, to be honest, but he got 12 points and held them to 6. So, but you see him calling the game. That's, Bruce Arians' play calling. You've seen it firsthand with the Colts. He is the call the deep shot, throw it at least 3 or 4 times a quarter, 40, 50 yards down the field, and see what happens. So
we'll see what happens, but I'm gonna say Seattle is probably gonna win that game.
It'll be interesting at least, and that's all we can ask for. Interest as the season winds down. I think you already touched on the 49ers, but I did want to clarify one thing you said. They have been mathematically eliminated from the playoffs as of today. So, congratulations, 49ers. That run of 3 years in a row in the NFC Championship game or better has come to an end. But that is something to be proud of in this salary cap-driven day and age. 3 straight trips to the NFC Championship game with Alex Smith and Colin Kaepernick at quarterback. When we look back on that in 10 or 15 years, we'll probably marvel that Jim Harbaugh could even get to NFC Championship games or better with those guys at quarterback.
Yeah, no kidding. Because and Alex Smith, he's a game control, game manager type QB. Kaepernick, people thought he was going to be the next great thing. As we've seen this year, maybe he can still turn it around, but from what I've seen this year, he's not a great quarterback. He's not even a good quarterback this year.
Well, if your definition of a good quarterback is somebody that completes less than 50% of their passes and gets about 112 yards passing a game, then yeah, he's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, horrible results for the 49ers today. So, but I think that's, other than the Colts wrapping up the division in an ugly game and Andrew Luck giving away more points and Tom Brady leading the typical New England throttling of an AFC East opponent in Foxborough to win the division, I'd say the Denver-San Diego game was probably the most interesting of those wrap-up games because, again, Peyton Manning didn't look great. And I'm just wondering, Mark, are you worried at this point if you're a Bronco fan? Because Denver, ever since that New England game, hasn't looked great. The offense hasn't put it together. Julius Thomas was finally back today, and he had one really nice catch down the sideline that helped them drive in and get some of the points that helped move them to the AFC West Championship. But Peyton Manning threw 1 touchdown. This is not vintage Peyton Manning out there. This is trying to run the ball, but yet when they couldn't, he wasn't able to execute enough to throw them into the end zone. So, again, are you worried if you're a Broncos fan?
No, I'm not too worried at this point. They're 11-3. Peyton Manning can do what he needs to when he needs to. He's had a little bit of health issues, but like you said, Julius Thomas is back. And, they're going to sit back to the next 2. They're at Cincinnati at home against Oakland. Even if they lose Cincinnati, obviously they're going to crush Oakland. So at worst, they're going to finish 12-4. They're pretty much, almost kind of walked into the number 2 seed at this point. So they're going to have a bye. Then they're going to have a home game that they'll probably win. And it's going to come down to that AFC Championship game at New England. That's what it comes down to at this point, obviously. You either have to give the edge to New England. But at this point, no, I'm not too worried.
Well, hang on. Let's not give Peyton Manning a pass in his first playoff game either, though, because as you well know, being a Colt and Manning fan, that first playoff game is oftentimes the hardest one for Peyton Manning teams to get through, even at home. we've seen with the Colts losing to the Steelers, losing to the Jets, the Broncos losing to Baltimore a few years ago. A lot of times Peyton Manning in that first playoff game, when the offense isn't in sync, as it isn't now, can't just snap his fingers and get 40 points on the board to win. And if they're playing, say, the Colts in the first game, the Colts already have a win under their belt in the playoffs, that could be trouble.
Yeah, it's possible. Sure. But Denver's 7-0 at home this year. They have a great offense. They have a better defense than they did last year. There's the chance, of course, that they could lose if their timing is off and then the bye ends up hurting them. But I think we're likely looking at a Broncos at Patriots AFC Championship game.
Definitely likely, but the way you phrased it before, I mean, it was a foregone conclusion in your mind, and it shouldn't be, because we've seen this before far too many times for Colt fans. But it's definitely possible that either the Patriots or the Broncos does not make it to the AFC Championship game. In fact, the 1 and 2 rarely in the AFC have made it over the last, say, 15 years since the turn of the century. NFC seems to be a little more following form, with 1 and 2 making it a lot more often, but for whatever reason the AFC has had more variability with the 1s and 2s.
They probably have, but I think this year, I'm not going to go too much based on history. When I look at the AFC this year, I think it's pretty much the Patriots. Broncos are a good level ahead of all the other teams. You know, when you look at like fancy rankings and you do teams by tiers, if you're doing tiers in the AFC, clearly the Patriots and the Broncos are on a tier above any other team. They're both 7-0 at home. They'll probably both finish 8-0 at home, and then they're both going to have that bye and have to just win one home game to get to that AFC Championship game. I think it's a foregone conclusion, but I'm saying I think it's better than a 50-50 shot at this point. I think it's more like a 75% chance we see that game.
Crazy, but okay. You heard it here first. Mark has already written down that come January, I believe it's 18th, 19th?
17th, something like that, whatever that Sunday is.
Yeah, whatever that Sunday is, you're saying it's Denver at New England. And I'm assuming you're putting that in the primetime slot.
I don't know how that. I think the NFL tends to switch that back and forth between the AFC and the NFC. I don't think they wait based off of, because they usually announce it like right even during wildcard weekend, or I think maybe even before that. I think they usually kind of just switch back and forth between the AFC and NFC with that regards to teams and matchups.
Okay, well, if that's the case, then it'll likely be the early game, because we're both assuming that the late game will be out west, because Seattle could be hosting, or Dallas could be hosting, or Arizona, or Green Bay, so you'd be in a different time zone.
Yeah, but I'm not even sure if they look at that. I think I could be wrong here, but I'm thinking in the last few years they tend to just switch those back and forth between AFC and NFC. Just it's NFC then AFC one year, and then vice versa the next year, and then vice versa the next year, so on and so on.
All right, well, if it's a flip-flop, then we'll see what happens. But Mark, you're calling Broncos and Patriots AFC Championship game. Gutsy call.
Speaking of calling things, I'm gonna break something else here too. You heard it here first.
What? Breaking news? Dun
breaking
dun
news.
dun dun.
You do love doing that kind of thing. You're quite good at it, so you should be more than happy to do it. But Week 17, the primetime game, NFL isn't going to officially announce it until after Week 16, and they see the standings and see where teams stand. They want to try to pick a game where it has playoff implications for both teams. And for the last 3 years, it's involved the Cowboys. This year, it finally will not. So you heard it here first. The Week 17 primetime game is going to be the Bengals and the Steelers. I've looked at the schedule. There's a couple other possibilities, but that's the one that easily stands out. Cincinnati's 9-4-1 right now. Pittsburgh is 9-5. As of right now, they're both in the playoffs, and you got to imagine after just one more game, that Week 17 game is still going to have playoff implications for both teams.
But wait, who do the Jets play that week? Shouldn't that be in prime time? What about the Bucks?
Yeah, if you're looking at number one draft pick implications, then yes, we should consider them.
I would definitely think if we could only be lucky enough to have Jacksonville and Tennessee playing with the number one draft pick on the line, that should be moved up to a primetime slot. I mean, that is riveting television.
Well, since you're going to go ahead and steal my thunder for the Week 16 look ahead, thanks a lot. This coming Thursday night game, primetime game, is the Jaguars versus the Titans. 2-12 versus 2-12. It's a virtual play-in game for the number one draft pick. So
that is crazy. I actually did know that they had a primetime game, so I did steal your thunder. I apologize, but it is crazy that we can imagine 12 to 14 people watching that game. Do you think is that fair?
It's got to be the worst primetime game ever, at least as far as records go. 2-12 versus 2-12. And here's the juicy little nugget. I got this from the Clay Travis Twitter feed. The Jaguars have been underdogs in 42 consecutive games. That's a mind-blowing stat as it is. Because 42 games is more than two straight. It's like 2.5 NFL seasons that they've been underdogs. They are 3-point favorites this week against the Titans. So A, the streak is over. And B, this is just going to be probably the worst primetime game you've ever seen. It's just only two teams trying to avoid scoring because neither team wants to win.
Now, does the line that he quoted there, the 42 straight games, is that the line it goes off at? Maybe a lot of money will come in on Tennessee and keep the streak alive.
That is true. It's possible, but let's face it. Tennessee was a home underdog against the Jets today. So that game was 2-11 versus 2-11. The Titans were at home, and they were a 3-point underdog to the Jets. Well, speaking of which, I think we buried the lead here. We've talked about all these games today. Jets-Titans. How have we not discussed this game yet? This honestly, if anyone watched this entire game, first of all, I don't know, either give them a medal or put them in a straitjacket because it was a bad game.
Wait. They could be relatives. So if you're a relative of a Titan or Jet and they perhaps pay for your television coverage, your cable bill or something, and they require you to watch, I think that's fair.
Maybe. I mean, even that might be stressing it. I mean, we're talking a game of just epic suckitude here. I mean, and the funny thing is, when I saw this game on the schedule, I thought, oh my God, I should bet the under on this game because it's going to be two teams trying to avoid scoring against each other. If anything, Rex Ryan may want to try to win because he knows he's gone anyway, whereas Wizard Hunt theoretically should be back next year after only being there 1 year, but that's maybe a discussion for another time. But the over-under, I think, was 40.5 or 41, and sure enough, it went way under 16-11 final score. But I never got around to placing that bet. Man, it's just, when I saw that, neither team wants to win or score.
The crazy part is that Rex Ryan, even in winning, has screwed the franchise. As you said, Rex isn't going to be back next year. We're all certain of that. I'm not sure Isaac will be back next year, the GM. But the rare victories he did piece together this year were at horrible times for them and may have cost them a shot at a QB, which is clearly what they need. Now they'll fall. I think right now they're in the 5 or the 6 spot. It'll all depend on tiebreakers at the end, and who knows, they can move up a spot or two or down a spot or two. But at this point, they've probably taken themselves out of the running for the number 1 overall pick. And wow, is that just a horrible feeling to be a Jets fan, because even when they win, they screw you. So great job by the Titans, though. And I know you didn't get to see that game because you weren't one of the 14 people that they measured on the Nielsen rating, but the Red Zone channel did take us to the end of that, and it was a near Music City miracle by the Titans. And yet Delaney Walker got the ball off a pitch from, sadly enough, Charlie Whitehurst well down the field on a hook and ladder play. And he makes this great move, gets a block. He's running towards the end zone inside the 10, and he runs straight into a defender. And at that moment, I think he realized, it's better if I get tackled than if we score and win. It's a great job by Delaney Walker. All of you Tennessee Titan fans, you should basically buy his dinner. If you see him out of the bar, get him a drink, because he saved you a shot at the number 1 pick.
Wait, can you do that breaking news sound again?
Dun, 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 dun.
So you said the Jets obviously has a quarterback. So are you breaking the news that Geno Smith is not the long-term answer?
I didn't say that. I would never say that Geno Smith wasn't the long-term answer at quarterback for a team. But I don't think Geno Smith is the long-term answer at quarterback for the Jets. And
maybe for the CFL team?
I don't want to give him too much pressure by, putting him on the Winnipeg Bombers and the Calgary Stampede. Let's just let his quarterbacking career evolve as it naturally will, which I believe would be in the European League, except for we folded that a number of years ago.
Yes, we did.
So unfortunately for Geno, his options are fewer and farther between now. But yes, I'm breaking that news. I don't think Geno Smith is the long-term solution. So sorry, Geno. But I'll talk about Geno Smith later in Miller's Minute.
Oh, I can't wait.
That's what we call a tease in the business, Mark.
I'm waiting with bated breath.
And so, obviously, as you noted there, though, we do have some teams in the running for the number one overall pick. And the Heisman ceremony was this weekend. Marcus Mariota, to no one's surprise, ran away with it, got 90+% of the vote. So I'm assuming, Mark, that your thinking is that this is a race for Mariota?
Well, I think so. I think he's probably the top QB on the board. I think there's some people that might look at Winston. I think anyone that's listened to this podcast in the past knows my feelings on Winston. I think he has the maturity level of a fifth grader, and if I'm drafting a QB and paying him millions of dollars, I would not select Winston to do that. He certainly has, the physical skills, and he hasn't even lost a single game in college yet. So there are teams that certainly will look at him, but if I'm looking at a QB in this draft class, I think you'd have to look at Mariota. Now, it depends a little bit on your offensive philosophy and who your head coach is. Obviously, Mariota is a little bit more of a running quarterback than a pure pocket passer. So if you have an offense that you strictly want a pure pocket passer, maybe you look in a different direction. But as far as who I think is going to be the top QB selected in this draft, I think it's going to be Marcus.
But I don't disagree that he'll probably be the number one QB taken, and I agree completely on your Jameis Winston comments about the maturity and the decision making. Let's not forget also that his performance on the field hasn't been great. Some people have, even during the Heisman build-up and before the finalists were announced, said, they're taking into account all the off-field things, and that's going to hurt Jameis Winston. I think his 15 interceptions hurt Jameis Winston this year. You're not going to get invited to the Heisman ceremony when you have just a few more touchdowns than interceptions, right?
I think he had 17. I think, I don't have this in front of me, but I think his final stats were 20 passing touchdowns and 17 interceptions. And yet somehow he finished sixth in the Heisman voting, which has got to be from people saying, well, he's the QB of the number one team. And he's got 4 number one votes. And then I realized, well, past Heisman voters get a vote. So he himself is probably one of his 4 first place votes, but how did 3 other people decide that he was the top Heisman contender this year?
Well, it's the Sports Writers of America. Is that who are the Heisman voters?
Yeah, sports writers across the country, as well as all past Heisman voters.
Right. So you counted 1 for him. Maybe another Florida State alum who was a Heisman Trophy winner voted for him just to be nice to the university.
You're onto something. Charlie Ward and Chris Winkie.
I did want to bring up Charlie Ward's name because he was the best point guard that ever won the Heisman. But also, you have to figure the Tallahassee writer probably did that as a show of support or something like that, because if you don't and Jimbo Fisher finds out that you didn't vote Jameis Winston first on your Heisman ballot, you're cut off from getting any interviews. Not that Jimbo Fisher seems like, a slimy kind of sleazy coach that would cover things up or do things in a spiteful manner. I would never say that. But maybe as a reporter, you're worried about things like that.
I think Jimbo Fisher is a used car salesman on the side or in the off-season, but I think we've just figured out the 4 first place votes. It was Jameis, Chris Winkie, Charlie Ward, and the Tallahassee writer.
Mystery solved. So we can put that X-File to bed. and move on to bigger and better things. But from the non-Heisman winning perspective, if a team gets the number one overall pick in the NFL draft, and maybe quarterback isn't their biggest need, say the Oakland Raiders, if they're set on Derek Carr, would you consider Amari Cooper or someone like that, or would you go with a defensive player, or would you just say, hey, I've got to auction this off and hope to get a trade? Because even though it's easier to trade now, there's still no guarantee you can trade out.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to. It sounds like we could do an entire podcast on this, in February or March or April, sort of leading up to the draft, and I'm assuming we probably will. But it kind of depends on which team has it, what kind of offers they get, what their situation is, what they've done in free agency. Free agency comes before the draft, so you kind of already know what you've done there. Obviously, if it's a team, any team that's drafted towards the top has plenty of needs. If you're the Bucks, you already have Vincent Jackson and Mike Evans. Jackson's a little older, but obviously Evans is a rookie and it looks really good. Then maybe you don't need Amari Cooper. If you're the Raiders, you have tons of needs. There's some good defensive players in this draft that they could maybe look at. But then again, I've seen a fair number of Alabama games this year. And Amari Cooper looks to be the real deal. And I love the fact, too, he's not one of those prima donna wide receivers. He's not all about him. He seems like a very team-oriented wide receiver. He doesn't, celebrate like crazy at every touchdown. He's just very professional. For everything I've heard and read about him, he has a great work ethic. I think Amari Cooper will probably be, a Pro Bowl wide receiver for the next 10, 12 years.
Yeah, it's funny you say he seems like a professional and he, does things the right way. He isn't the diva, because if you think of Julio Jones, the last great Alabama receiver that came out a few years ago, I would more or less put him in the same category. You don't see him doing the diva act quite as much as you would have with the T.O.s of the world and the Chad Ochocinco Johnsons of the world. So it seems like Amari Cooper falls more into the Marvin Harrison, I go about my business. I'm a wide receiver. My job is to catch the ball. So when I catch the ball, I shouldn't be surprised and I shouldn't make a big deal about it, because catching the ball is what you have me out here to do. So that's good to see, and I agree with you. I think he's going to be a fabulous player, and that's why I think we will have a couple of podcasts in the future, right after the season, probably as the draft order gets set, and figure out some projections of what we think could happen, and then as free agency occurs and prior to the draft. So listeners, keep tuning in. You'll see postings and tweets from us, because we will continue the podcast even after the season, because there will be NFL news to talk about nearly year-round, as we all know.
Yeah, we will do that, but quickly on Cooper as well. Even though I think he is going to be an amazing talent, very productive in the NFL, it's very rare to see a wide receiver go number one. The last time was Keyshawn Johnson way back in, I think, 96, so almost 20 years ago. Even though we've had some, you mentioned Julio Jones, the Falcons gave up a lot to get him, but he didn't go number one. Sammy Watkins this year, there was big interest in him. He didn't go till, I think, number 4. There was, trade up to get him, but still. Megatron, one of the most highly touted wide receivers of the last, 10 years, went number 2 or 3. So it's very rare for a wide receiver to go number 1. Amari Cooper could do it, but just based on history, I'm going to say he probably won't go number 1.
I'm probably going to agree, but I will say just throw him the damn ball.
Yes. Keyshawn. Nice Keyshawn reference.
There you go. Well, that wraps my Week 15 update and the Heisman / number 1 overall pick debate. Any other items from Week 15 you need to touch on before we move on to our regular segments?
No, just as a real quick thing to point out, we mentioned the playoff teams and how much they're going to be the same as last year. I think we hit a streak of a fair number of years, I don't know, like 5 or 6 or 6 out of 7, something like that, where a worst place team from the prior year ended up winning the division the next year, and that streak is over. So the last place teams from last year were Washington, Minnesota, Tampa Bay, St. Louis, Buffalo, Cleveland, Houston, and Oakland. And none of those teams are going to win the division this year. So streak over.
boo on you, last place teams, for ruining our streak. Especially you. I'm looking at you, Cleveland and Minnesota.
Yep, they had a chance there for a little bit, but, well, especially Cleveland, but didn't happen.
I'm not saying boo on you, Houston, because I didn't want you to beat the Colts. But other than that, boo on you, last place teams.
Yes.
All right, well, let's transition then from our Vegas in Week 15 look back into one of our regular segments we introduced a couple weeks ago. We like to call it On the Spot. One of us will ask the other 3 very interesting questions and let the questionee respond for about a minute, and then we'll move on. So, Mark, last week I asked you 3 questions, so this week you get to ask me 3 questions that I have no idea what they are. So, fire away. I am ready on the spot.
All right, here we go. Question number 1. Besides taking kicker and defense too early, because that is just too easy of an answer, what is the number 1 thing that people do wrong in fantasy football drafts?
Well, other than trying to draft against you or I and thinking that they could win, I'd say the 2 things that I notice quite often are backing up a quarterback that you are never going to play. Say you draft Drew Brees, Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers, and then in round 8 you grab a backup quarterback. That is the worst idea you've had in weeks, because if you draft Peyton Manning or Drew Brees or any of the guys in the first 2 rounds, your plan is to play them every week except for their bye week. You don't waste pick 8 on a backup quarterback. And then the other that I'm not a fan of at all is handcuffing. I see people burn early picks on handcuffs, but it's just taking up 2 roster spots for 1 player, basically. I saw this year, Jamal Charles, Niall Davis. People were taking Jamal Charles with the 3rd, 4th pick overall and grabbing Niles Davis in the 7th round. Well, Niles Davis doesn't do anything unless Jamal Charles is hurt. We've seen that this year. They said they'll share the load, but they don't. And that's always the case. So those are the things that I would say that pet peeves of mine I think fantasy players do wrong. Don't worry about a handcuff. Go out and get real players that could help your team week in, week out. Take a flyer on a Jordan Matthews. You could have easily had a Jordan Matthews over a Niles Davis, and wow, that would have worked out for you. And don't back up your quarterback if you draft a quarterback in the first 2 rounds until way late. Look at when Peyton Manning's bye is. Oh, it's week 4. Look at the week 4 games. Find a quarterback that has a matchup in week 4 that you think will be good before you do the draft that nobody's going to draft. Like Carson Palmer might have been a good one. I don't honestly know who he played in week 4, but you might have looked at those matchups and said, that's the guy I want.
Well, Carson Palmer actually did not play anyone in week 4. That was one of the weeks that he missed with his nerve issue, and Drew Stanton started. So, but yes, I hear what you're saying. I do agree with that. If you take one of these stud QBs, like one of the top 5, especially nowadays too, like in the olden days when QBs were not as protected as they were, and they're more likely to get injured. But today's NFL, when if you touch the QB when you're not supposed to, or even just graze his shoulder or something like that, you get a flag, you're so protected. You do, of course, occasionally see injuries. Nick Foles, had a collarbone issue this year, but it happens. But if you draft one of the stud QBs, I agree. Don't waste a roster spot. The handcuffing, I mostly agree. We've kind of talked about that before. I definitely think it's overrated. I think there are occasionally rare situations where it might make sense. But I think even, in addition to taking the backup for the player, the running back that you draft, why is it any worse to take the backup from another team? Like, so for example, if you took Jamal Charles, and instead of taking Niall Davis, you could take Kadeem Carey, and then if Matt Forte goes down, then you've got, a running back that's kind of similar, that's going to be in that offense, who would then be a starter as well. And then you have 2 starters, because then you would be able to start Jamal Charles and Kadeem Carey, versus if you have Charles and Davis, you're only ever going to be able to start one of them at once. Granted, you have some insurance if he gets injured, but you have more upside the other way, where you could end up with 2 viable starters instead of 1.
Yes, completely agree.
Okay. Question number 2, similar to that, except in real life football, not in fantasy football, what do you think are the top two main things that differentiate good, successful franchises from the bad franchises, i.e. teams like the Raiders?
I don't have enough time. We're going to run out of space on the computer here if I try and tell you what's wrong with everything wrong with the Raiders. So I'll go to the other side of it and say what about the teams that do it right. Although I will have my second point here is not going to make you happy, but the first one is find your quarterback. As you said, in today's day and age, if you look cross-eyed at the quarterback, you get a flag. You need to know that the quarterback you have is somebody you think you can win with, and it doesn't have to be. I don't say that you have to have Peyton Manning or Tom Brady or Drew Brees or Aaron Rodgers, although that helps and they tend to win more than they lose. But if you look at the Super Bowl winners, Russell Wilson, you look back, Joe Flacco, continue going back, you can find it's not always the top pick or the stud QB, the greatest ever with the Rodgers and the Brees and the Mannings. Yeah, they each have a Super Bowl win. That's nice. But just as often, you're finding it with the Russell Wilsons and the Joe Flaccos of the world, the Trent Dilfers before that. And you can win with those guys, but you have to know that your quarterback is what you want your quarterback to be, and then build your team around that quarterback. You can't be Jim Harbaugh, who you build your team around Alex Smith, and it actually works pretty well, and then you throw Colin Kaepernick in and say, okay, you know what we're going to do? We're going to run the pistol this year. And it works really well, and then you say, yeah, we're not going to run the pistol anymore. We're going to have you be a drop-back passer. Because that's not really going to work. I've seen it. It doesn't work. So the first thing I would say is the teams that can identify a quarterback and build around that quarterback tend to do better than others. Oakland just always goes after a guy with a big arm and hopes and prays for some long balls. That's not really a strategy. I mean, it's more of a tech mobile strategy than it is an NFL strategy. The other thing I would say is have a little luck. And I don't mean Andrew Luck, although that wouldn't hurt. But this, obviously, you can't, as an organization, say we need to be lucky. But if you look at a team like the Colts, I mean, how lucky is it that the year you have the number one pick and you need a quarterback, you get Peyton Manning. The year he gets injured and then you get the number one pick, Andrew Luck's coming out. So a team like that, the quarterback, as I said in part one, it fell into their lap, so they got a little lucky. Also, teams that find a guy and it seems to be the right fit, look at Washington. You get RG3, you have to have a little luck that he doesn't get hurt. Once he got hurt, he's done. I mean, I honestly think he's shot. I don't know that he's going to be back in Washington, and if he is, I don't know that they're going to win any games. So you have to have that little aspect of luck as well as an organization where the guys you take don't get injured. I mean, to talk about another sport, I mean, the Greg Oden over Kevin Durant draft. Greg Oden is clearly this monster of a man, and if he can play all the time, he would be a dominating force, and that would have been a great pick. He gets hurt, and you're like, wow, we could have had Kevin Durant.
So, I believe 28 of the 32 NFL GMs listen to our podcast on a regular basis. I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to shame the 4 that don't listen to us. But what you're saying is they need to go invest in 4-leaf clovers and lucky rabbit's feet.
It's rabbit's feet. Rabbit's feet, plural.
Rabbit's feet.
Yes,
okay.
Yes, rabbit's feet. I actually don't believe in the 4-leaf clover concept. I mean, I'm not Irish, so sorry for those of you that are. But yeah, the lucky rabbit's feet, definitely. Maybe go to Nolan's, ask one of the voodoo people to help you out. Maybe make a little doll, and, voodoo doll poke some holes in Tom Brady or something. Whatever it takes. I mean, come on. But yes, the real answer is find your quarterback and then build a franchise around your quarterback. And again, you don't have to have a quarterback that is otherworldly. You have to have a quarterback you believe you can win with and build a team around him. Don't build a team for Peyton Manning and put in RG3. Don't build a team for Tom Brady and put in Jake Locker. Build a team if you happen to have Blake Bortles and you're the Jags and you think Blake Bortles is the answer. Build a team that maximizes Blake Bortles. Don't look at it and say, oh, all the great quarterbacks, they do this and they do that. Well, make Blake Bortles the best he can be, not the best Peyton Manning he can be.
So the Cleveland Browns have started approximately 39 different quarterbacks over the last 10 or so years. Are you telling me they're doing something wrong?
I'm going to say first, I believe it was 39 quarterbacks over the last 3 years, but be that as it may. I would say they either can't identify the QB or they have too much change in the management, which they have. And that's, I guess, another thing. Stability in management would be nice because then when you do find a quarterback, you build around him. Their problem is they find a quarterback. The moment he has any struggles, the front office is fired, and then they switch quarterbacks. And then that quarterback struggles, and they fire the front office, and the next quarterback struggles. It's a nice vicious cycle, so Cleveland fans get used to it because after you're 0 for Johnny today, you look like you don't have the quarterback of the future on the roster. And all those people that were clamoring for Brian Hoyer to be benched for Johnny, Brian Hoyer beat the Bengals the last time they played, which is like 5 or 6 weeks ago. Maybe you should have waited until after this game. Hey, Hoyer's been playing horribly. I'm not going to argue he's a good quarterback, but he did beat the Bengals last time. In fact, they scored 20-some points against the Bengals. That's 20-some more than Johnny put up.
Well, the Browns do have 2 first-round picks next year. They have their own and Buffalo. People are probably hoping that the Buffalo pick would be much, much higher than it is based on their recent history. But, of course, giving Cleveland luck as a franchise, the Bills have 8 wins this year and still get to play the Raiders, so they'll probably get to 9 wins. So the Browns will have 2 picks in the kind of maybe 17 and 22nd range, somewhere in there. What you're telling me is they need to package those picks, move up to around 6 or 7, and get, maybe Brett Hundley or Jameis Winston or something like that?
No, they believe in Johnny football. Come on. They've got the greatest show in the nightclub, because he's not the greatest show on turf, but he's the greatest show off the turf.
Yes.
I have a recommendation for Cleveland, though. If at all possible, and I know it's going to be hard, he's actually very talented, and it would be really hard to pry him away, but they need to pair up Gronkowski with Manziel. And I'm not even talking on the field. If they can figure out a way to get off the field, that would be excellent.
I knew where you were going before you even got there. So.
Well, I wish I knew where they were going because we know that'd be a party.
Yes. So, moving to our third question, I will preface this with a story. So, in a high-stakes dynasty league that I'm in, someone who did not make the playoffs, but yet is still fighting for draft spots because the teams that don't make the playoffs still have kind of their own mini playoff to fight for the draft spot in the rookie draft the following year. There's a team that started Cam Newton today, which, of course, as we've known since I think around Wednesday, he's not playing this week. And his team had other viable QBs on the roster. They had Joe Flacco and someone else, I forget who. But they had other options, and yet they started Cam Newton. So that is one of my biggest fantasy pet peeves of people who are not paying attention to the roster and are starting injured players or people that are on bye. So not repeating that one. What is your biggest fantasy pet peeve?
Well, just to be clear, though, in this playing for the first pick, is it the team that loses out that gets the first pick?
No, you're playing of the 6 teams that don't make the playoffs, but that's like a separate little mini bracket where you're trying to advance and win, and the team that wins this mini bracket gets the first pick. So.
Okay, so starting Cam Newton really hurt his chances of getting the top pick.
Exactly.
Well, then it only hurt him, because that is bad that he doesn't pay attention, doesn't fill out his roster or whatever, but if it only hurts him...
It doesn't only hurt him because there are 7 rounds of the rookie draft that people do trades beforehand, so he doesn't own all of his own picks. Other people own some of his picks in other rounds, and so he has...
So does Mark Heflin own any of his picks?
No, actually I do not.
Okay, I wanted to be clear.
It's still a pet peeve because it's still annoying.
No, I agree it's bad for him, but I just wanted to understand, because if it's a tanking pool, then he did exactly what he should, and it's all for it. But if it's a win to get the pick, then he just hurt it. his draft status, I assume. I assume he didn't win. And by hurting his draft status, hurt others as well. So yeah, that's a pet peeve. I don't know that I have too many fantasy pet peeves, other than people that during the draft players, in round 10 or later, and you know the guy. You've probably been in a draft with him, and looks through his crumpled up sheets. He's moving things around. Wasn't prepared for the draft apparently, and says something like, "Is Aaron Rodgers still available?" Well, no. It turns out around 10 he's not. Everyone that just drafted a quarterback and their backup probably would have taken him if he was available after the second round. So that's kind of annoying to me. And the other one is obviously the guy that drafts a kicker anywhere before the, last round or second to last round. And it happens, and this happens. You've been in these leagues. You're sitting in the draft room, and bam, round 10 rolls around, and Steven Gostkowski gets taken, and you're just like, seriously? And it always tends, the reason I think of it as a pet peeve, it tends to be after I've picked, and then there's a long tail coming back to me, so I'm going to wait for a while, and somebody will take the kicker. And that just pushed a good player down to these other guys. It didn't help me out tremendously. It pushed one guy down, but 15 picks from now. But some guy who's 2 away from me was probably, shifting through paper, trying to figure out who to take, and then somebody takes a kicker. And they're like, sweet, the top guy on my board is still there. So those mine are more draft related than playing related.
That works.
All right, well, that is On the Spot. Our 3 semi-quick takes on 3 unusual topics, usually related to fantasy or football, but they could get a little off topic in the future, so keep tuning in and see where we go with that. But now, Mark, after On the Spot, I know it's hard to follow that up, but the one thing that we can always count on is the oft imitated, never duplicated, the one, the only, Hef's Hate. So give it to me. What does Hef hate this week?
Alright. This week, I hate the people that get irrationally offended based off of sports writers, fucking people on the internet that are writing articles, rankings of teams and or game picks. And you see it so often. If you ever happen to read the comments below an article, which I usually do not, because most of them are pretty stupid, but if you do ever read any of those, especially for a picks article or a rankings article, you will see people just getting super offended, saying that the author's an idiot. Of course, you see this now on Twitter as well, probably on Facebook as well, any kind of media where they can, slam the author and tell the author how stupid he is. First of all, why do you care? Why are you taking offense? Especially when it's rankings for, pros, where it doesn't matter whatsoever. You see this, too, with, Peter King, where he has the Fine 15 in his MMQB articles every Monday, and you'll see people that are like, how could you possibly put Team X ahead of Team Y when both, who cares? It doesn't matter. It affects nothing. The team's seeds are based on their records. His opinion on whether your team is ahead or behind, Team X is irrelevant. Just take it for what it is. It's entertainment. It's one man's opinion. Read it, digest it, move on. Same thing with game picks. When you see people an author will pick, I think, this team's going to pick this other team, 30 to 20. And then the team that he predicts to lose ends up winning. And then people will go back to that article and be like, oh, you idiot, you thought this team was going to lose and they won. Who cares? People get picks wrong all the time. Things happen. Look at the NFL. The 2-12 Titans we dominated the Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City in Week 1. The Bucks, the 2-win Bucks won at Pittsburgh. Things happen. And so for people to just get so bent out of shape and try to, shame the author for making the wrong pick or questioning his sanity for ranking one team above the other, I don't get it. Read it, be entertained by it, move on, just discuss the article with a friend or something if you want, but to actually take the time to write a comment and tell the author how dumb he is, what are you doing, son? That's this week's FC.
Good. Yeah, that's nice. Now, hang on. I'm just finishing up my email to Bill Simmons. I'm ridiculing him for some of his picks from this week. And then I'm going to go make a quick posting because John Clayton's a moron because his power ranking was ridiculously silly. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm back now. Don't worry. So, that was a good one. Well, I didn't really listen, but I hope that was a good Hef's hate.
I think it was, yeah. I think it hit home for some people, hopefully.
Good. I hope it did. And now that I've vented on these authors for their power rankings and their silly picks for the week, I feel better. So apparently it's a win-win. With that, why don't we move to another one of our weekly segments? It's Miller's Minute, where I divulge some useful tidbits, hopefully, about pop culture and others. And Mark, as we get to the end of the year, everyone always loves to do like the year in review type analysis, and so I figured in the spirit of nearing the end of 2014, I'd look back at some of the movies from 2014, kind of in a general sense and also with a few recommendations. So I like to refer to 2014. It wasn't the year of the underdog for Vegas as we thought it would be, but in movies, it was definitely the year of Marvel. 3 of the biggest movies of the year were X-Men, Captain America, both of those were sequels, and the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. Marvel is printing money, and I don't know if you realize this, but they were acquired by ABC Disney a few years ago, so Disney now uses ABC to promote its Marvel movies and has a show on there, and they also own ESPN, as you probably do know, so you can cross-pollinate across all these different platforms. So Marvel is just a money-printing machine. So those 3 movies, and I do recommend Guardians of the Galaxy. If you haven't seen it, go check that out. It was actually a really good movie for a bunch of characters that I had no idea who they were. It wasn't like Spider-Man or Wolverine, people that you probably had heard of or knew the character. These were like 5 little different characters, but it was actually really well done. But a couple other big movies from the year, the Lego Movie. So this is clearly the year of kids' movies as well, because How to Train a Dragon 2 and the Lego Movie both had huge years at the box office. And Lego Movie, this is a movie, they basically took Legos, you know Legos, they're the little bricks you connect. They made a whole movie out of the people and the interaction and everything, and then it ends up that it's all in some kid's mind, kind of, which is exactly what Legos are. So it was a good concept. For those that are older than the animated or Marvel movie age, I think 2 really good movies for the year that you should check out. Nightcrawler with Jake Gyllenhaal. Yeah, you know Jake. G?
Gyllenhaal.
Yes, I know. I just like to butcher his last name. It's fun. His performance in that is ridiculously good. He gets all, I think he dieted and he got all gaunt and he's like kind of crazy-eyed the whole time. It's really well done. And then Geno Smith and I, we went and saw Gone Girl while he was out here in San Diego. You know, he didn't have time to go to the team meeting, read through the playbook. Why would you do that? No, we went to see Gone Girl. Really well done. Ben Affleck, the only role he probably could play Ben Affleck in, and it actually made sense. You know, the character that is really him, where he's sort of disengaged from reality and has that look on his face all the time, and he's kind of dopey looking. Yeah, it was a perfect role for him. So those are my movie reviews for the year. So definitely, if you get a chance, Guardians of the Galaxy, Nightcrawler, crazy good. And if Geno Smith happens to be in town with you, Gone Girl, go see it.
That was a good noise minute. I have 2 comments. I was anxiously waiting for the Geno Smith. I was like on the edge of my seat because you gave us the teaser earlier, and I was just, hoping and praying that you were actually going to come through on that teaser. So well done on that. And then I haven't seen the Lego Movie. I think I'm holding out for the Lincoln Logs movie.
I don't know if the Lincoln Logs movie is going to be created, but maybe it will, because if you think back to the last few years, The Lone Ranger came back as a movie, and that sort of ties in the same era as Lincoln Logs, and now the Legos, a building toy, has gone. It's kind of the combination of the two. It's the Lone Ranger era with building toys. You could make a whole story about Lincoln Logs. I'm certain of it. and it's named after Abraham Lincoln, perhaps, or perhaps not. Either way, it clearly deserves its own. And if you think about other toys that have been turned into, or movies that have been created from other things, I mean, Pirates of the Caribbean was a Disney ride. It was a silly little boat ride at Disney World and Disneyland, and it became a huge movie series. So how can Lincoln Logs not have been made into a movie yet? I think you're onto something. Come down here. We'll go up to the Burbank area, pitch. I think we're money.
I think, and don't forget Battleship as well. Yeah, I think we need to put together a screenplay for Sorry.
We don't mention Battleship, okay? I don't know if you ever had to suffer through watching it multiple times, like some of us on airplanes did, but we don't talk about Battleship. Or Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. We never speak of that.
Yeah.
Good. But your first point, what I like to refer to that is you teased Geno Smith earlier, and then it's called paying off the tease. So there you go, everybody. We paid off the tease, and you only had to listen for an extra 40 minutes.
Good job on that.
All right, well, that was Miller's Minute. We'll have more of those before the end of the year, hopefully, and then obviously as we go into next year, we'll continue rolling right through pop culture and other non-football related items. But with that, Mark, let's move to the Week 16 look ahead. So obviously we already touched on a lot of this, but for those in survivor pools, maybe you could throw out a pick for them for Week 16. I know if you used Baltimore this week, you probably survived, and Baltimore was a good pick for many teams. I know a lot of people in the pool I was in had Baltimore still available. So for Week 16, again, it probably can't be Denver or New England, but give me a game out there that you think some people could use, and then maybe a few tidbits on the big games of the week.
Okay, I will try to go quick. I know we're running a little bit on the long side, and it's Christmas shopping season. People want to make sure they're caught up on that, so I'll try to go through here fairly quickly. As far as survivor picks, there's a few decent ones. Unfortunately, it's some of the better teams that you may have already used, but the Packers play at the Bucks, 10.5-point favorite there. The Patriots at the Jets. I don't like using road teams, but here we have a case of two really good teams playing at two really bad teams. Patriots are 10-point favorites there. It gets even trickier in Week 16 and 17 because you have to worry about the motivation of teams. Sometimes you have two, teams that are already eliminated that are playing each other. For example, the Giants at the Rams. Neither team really has anything to play for, but the Rams are at home. They've been playing fairly well recently, but then again, so the Giants. But if I had to choose, I would say maybe the Rams. And then Buffalo is at the Raiders. That would be my next one to throw out there. Buffalo obviously does have something to play for. They are still in contention for a playoff spot, and the Raiders are in contention for the number one pick. So if the Raiders knew it was good for them, they would probably lose, but if they don't, they'll probably win. But those are the ones that are out there. As far as the really good games of the week, let's see, Colts Cowboys should be a good game, probably a high scoring game. 10-4 versus 10-4. Colts already have the division wrapped up. They're playing for either to beat the 3 seed or the 4 seed. That's pretty much all that's in play there. Except for the Cowboys, we mentioned earlier in the podcast, they have quite a lot to play for, including potentially still being the number 1 seed. So they should be motivated there. And then the Sunday night game we talked about, Seahawks at the Cardinals, will go a long way towards determining the NFC playoff picture. And then a pretty decent Monday night game for the week of Christmas. You've got Broncos at the Bengals. So Broncos fighting to stay at number 2 seed. They'll potentially, if New England loses, they could still flip into the number 1 seed. So they'll be motivated. And then the Bengals lead their division and trying to hang on to that. So they'll be playing to win as well.
And as you already mentioned earlier in the podcast, we have Tennessee at Jacksonville. That, on Thursday night, is probably the game of the week.
Yes, I was not going to subject our listeners to that game again, but I guess that game is a good example of, I always butcher this word, but Schadenfreude, whatever that German word is, when you watch something for the pleasure of seeing people do poorly. Yeah, 2-12 versus 2-12. Two teams trying to lose so that they can get the number one jack. That should be, I guess, at least entertaining from watching two teams trying to avoid winning.
And if you happen to place a small monetary sum on the under, you might have a vested interest in watching.
This is true as well, yes.
All right, well played. I think the game's clearly, as we talked about before, Denver, Cincy, we didn't mention too much, but that's a good one. And then the Colts at the Cowboys, and the huge game, Seattle at Arizona, which could very well wrap up the NFC for Arizona or make the path look like it's going through Seattle again. And boy, 5 or 6 weeks ago, we probably wouldn't have thought Seattle would be in the running for the 1 seed, and there they are.
Very true.
All right, well, that is the last of my agenda items for tonight, Mark. Any last words that you'd like to add?
No, I think we covered everything.
Great. Well, then, sports fans, definitely go out and check the website, steelscorpionsports.com, Better Species of Fantasy Football. You can learn more about mulligans, multipliers, and the all-play format. You can, hopefully, on the blog page soon, find out all about our playoff results. Unfortunately, I don't think my name will be at the top of them, but I will be highly hopeful that maybe tomorrow and next week my team will perform a little better and get me back towards the top. Doubtful, but there's always hope. But with that, I will sign off from San Diego. This is Jeff Miller.
Signing off from San Jose, this is Mark Huffley.
And we'll talk to you next week, sports fans.